So hello and welcome to the New Gig podcast. I'm your host, Glen Hodgson, and today I'm delighted to be joined by the CEO of Swedish-Ukrainian IT company Beetroot, Mr. Andreas Flodström. How are you doing, Andreas?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Well, good to be here.
Excellent. Well, thank you for making the time. If we can just begin by you explaining a little bit about Beetroot, what you're doing at the moment, but also a little bit about your journey, Andreas. How did you get to where you are today?
Well, so we started actually almost 9 years ago, while two Swedes, both university students at the time, we decided to pack our bags and move down to Ukraine.
Yep.
And at the time, we had a sort of rough idea that we wanted to build a company that had some social impact, that was sort of borderless and working in an international environment, basically. We ended up in Ukraine. We ended up with deciding that IT is probably a good industry for us because it is borderless and it's something you can start without a lot of capital, which we didn't have at the time, and we could sort of experiment in different ways. And long story short, after some time of experimentation and an interesting period in Ukraine in particular, it has been, a journey where we are now a company of 550 people, or we call it an ecosystem because it's actually a few different companies. And the main thing we do, we help mainly fast scaling tech companies with IT competence and delivering software solutions. And additional to that, we have an academy called Beetroot Academy, where we are teaching nowadays online boot camps, mainly for Ukraine, but also in Sweden and Kosovo since recently.
Yeah.
And we have by now educated around 4,000 people. So that would be around, successfully graduated around 2% of all the tech industry in Ukraine.
Excellent. So real impact, real on the ground knowledge sharing, but also concrete results. So a pat on the back that can be achieved there, Andreas, in terms of meeting the goals. But it's really interesting what you were saying about the sort of the initial objectives you had there was, something that was borderless, something where you could really have an impact. And how would you say over this time since you founded the company, digitalization has been changing the environment you're operating in, but also the world of work more generally?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey because it has indeed. I mean, our business was already back then based on digitalization and the borderless, but of course it's changed a lot, and of course especially in the last year we've seen a lot of changes. But I would say it's basically we've seen now the changes that has been on the trend coming, but you've seen sort of 5 years of change in 1 year. But I mean, there are a lot of different angles you could take on this topic. But I mean, one of the interesting angles I like to take is that it is sort of you can call it a democratization of the workforce, because in the sense that you basically, if you work in the digital economy, you work online based, as long as you have at least access to basic education and a good internet connection, you can basically compete wherever you're based.
Yeah.
And now we see also, I mean, I think the big change for the last few years is that you've seen earlier that sort of young startup driven companies, they have been fairly open, and now larger corporations have been forced to become more open, which has also actually, I think, increased their chance of digitalization transformation, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking about the models of using people from different marketplaces, the kind of the shift we've had in recent times away from four walls with individuals who clock in every day, 5 days a week, 9 to 5, that has been a sort of a mindset shift as well, would you say, Andreas, in terms of making people more aware of what's possible and not just using what's on the doorstep, but being able to reach further afield for the technology and also the individuals with the knowledge to be able to leverage that?
Yeah, it's been interesting because I mean, for us, it wasn't a big switch in the sense that we already had, an infrastructure where we could work from home or from the office.
Right.
But it definitely changed the mindset, because now you really see that, what matters is not exactly how many hours you clock, or the amount of time you're in the office, but really what matters is the result, but also where you're located, because of course you see that people move back to the smaller cities. You can see a
Yeah.
potential of this de-urbanization. And I mean, frankly speaking, I mean, you can see different challenges, but in the big picture, at least, I mean, especially for a place like Ukraine, where maybe work opportunities in other fields are not yet that strong, you see that basically high quality, well paid works become completely available to a different level, which means
Right.
that, I mean, thanks to that, you're basically growing sort of a fast growing European level middle class
Yeah.
in a country where the average income is like 5 times lower than the income in the tech industry. So you can
Yeah.
sort of, that comparison with the finances is sort of a sign of what happens when you connect from a local market to a
Yeah.
global economy, basically.
Yeah, and creating those links that allows you to uh, be able to create something bigger than it is, but also plug in Ukraine in this instance into something bigger. And we say, are you seeing the benefits for organizations and individuals as well, Andreas? Would you say?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I think it's huge. I mean, as I already mentioned, for the individual, it's obvious if you're able to enter the global workforce in a poorer country, that's a
Yeah.
life-changing opportunity. But also of course, for companies. I mean, if you start to look for talent worldwide rather than just in your city, I mean, it actually creates, even in richer countries or whatever, it can
Yeah.
create opportunities to grow businesses based out of not necessarily the same locations as
Yeah.
you've been located before. And it also changes a little bit the way, I think it allows for a more sort of decentralized way of managing your team. So sort of this way of working, and makes it this work method sort of allows for it. And one of the shifts we have seen now, I'm very much from the sort of Ukrainian perspective, but I mean, we have always been working in multinational teams. But
Yeah.
one of the things that happen is that our teams in Ukraine who work with a client abroad suddenly feels closer to the client, because you're sort of equally distant as everyone
Yeah.
else sitting back home.
Yeah, and we've seen as well, I guess the shift from, as you say, people rushing into big cities every day. The fact that they can maybe sort of live further out, maybe in the countryside, as long as they have a fast broadband connection, and the impact on congestion in city centers, the stress of individuals, and also the impact on the environment as well, in terms of environmental greenhouse gas emissions. I suppose these are all things that are connected, and it goes back to your point from the beginning about democratization in a way.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely see that there is at least. I assume you can measure it too, but I mean, I see the opportunity of a more sustainable society, a little bit like
Mm,
going back, working in the modern economy, but at the same time going back to the roots. I even took the step myself. I didn't think before COVID that I would be moving to a house a little bit further from the center, and that just happened, and I feel great about it. So it's like,
yeah.
I think, yeah, I think you can be pretty positive. I really hope actually that a lot of those trends will stick
Yeah.
in the long term.
Mm. And do you
We'll
think
see.
that's the case, Andres? Are they here to stay, or do you think in 6 months' time everyone will go back to how things were in January, February 2020?
No, I don't think everyone will go back, but of course some things will probably go back to a more of what it was before. But at the same time, I think, I mean, I will not go back to what I did before. I will not
Mm.
be traveling 200 days per year around between the different cities. I will travel sometimes, but I will not do
Yeah,
it in the same way. And I think what we see, I mean, what we analyze in our teams and so on, you still have the need of a human connection and so on,
yeah,
but you would rather probably make offices a place where you meet and have workshops and so on, but and it's a place where you can go when you want to, but it's not a place where you should go and clock in every
Yeah,
morning. And I think even in terms of travel, not only business travels, but I think people will change their
yeah,
behaviors. In terms of the work transformation, I think that all of this what happens now is sort of things that were already happening. They just happen so much faster. Like
okay,
and even you can see that on the demand side for the services that we provide. That
yeah,
it was a small dip for like 3 months when every the world was in a bit of a panic, and then it just started to pick up, and then it's just been growing and growing and growing. And I would say that, I mean, the feeling we have, and it's the same when I speak to colleagues in the industry and so on, is that it's sort of double demand from what it was just before COVID.
right. So it's a real uptick in terms of need for services, and this is the positive element, Andreas. What would you say the sort of the biggest challenges are in terms of what you're facing at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question, and again, you can take different angles. But one, of course, when things change fast, especially when the skill set you need to be competitive on the market, that has a risk of leaving a lot of people behind.
Yeah,
I read an EU report recently that around 40% of the EU workforce doesn't have barely like a basic digital skill set. So
right.
of course, when industries change, when work that was needed before is not needed anymore, of course that
Mm,
will lead to a lot of challenges. I don't necessarily think that there will be. I don't think there will be a lack of jobs, but I think that the sort of we already see the mismatch uh,
yeah,
between what the market wants and what people are able to do. So I think the big, huge challenges in education,
yeah,
and that's also, I mean, that's also basically what the Beetroot Academy is working on. It's not, we're not trying to replace deep theoretical education in a university, but we are having programs that can help you to reskill and upskill in a fairly short amount of time. And that
yeah,
we also, by the way, since we moved online, we can sort of provide also provide globally. We even teach nowadays. We teach Swedes how to code with
yeah,
Ukrainian teachers, and they get employed in Sweden or anywhere else.
yeah,
I think you also have, I mean, you of course have this different like legislative challenges. Sort
right.
of where should all these gig workers be taxed?
Mm, yeah,
Can you track where they are taxed? Like, should will people just end up register in Estonia because they have the nicest system for e-residency, or
yeah.
I'm not an expert in that, but I can imagine if I would have a lot of thinking to do if you were sitting in a government trying to
Yeah.
figure these things out.
Yeah, no, the tax element will be very, very important. So, how much time do you spend? Where are you? When it's basically working in the cloud as well. This is one of the issues that is coming up more and more in terms of something that needs to be looked at. And the general feeling about the remote work, outsourcing, and technology as well. I think you highlighted that by saying that the speed with which technology is changing, but also disrupting a whole host of sectors, and it's not going away anytime soon. This is probably one of the elements that society needs to catch up with, but also harness as opposed to try to ignore it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot stop these trends. I think you
Yeah.
have to, deal with the consequences, use the opportunities, because I think there are mainly positive things. But of course, I
Mm,
mean, it will be painful it will be painful for various sectors, for individuals who, for some reason, not able to catch up with the quick changes. And of course, as a society, of course, we have to put a lot of, I think I mean, you have to reform the educational system like
right.
drastically, like
Yeah.
and even, I mean, to be fair, like even a lot of the skill sets that are today sort of, I mean, even like basic coding skills might not be so needed anymore in 5-6 years
Right.
from now.
Mm.
So you always have to sort of. But in the end of the day, I mean, what we are talking about, this is like the structural issues. But I mean, what we are working towards, I think, is a more sustainable world, more efficient,
Yeah.
more more opportunities. I mean, maybe you know, yeah, I'm tend to be an optimist, but I think I mean some of the things you see in with all the sort of backlash on countries sort of turning inwards and so on. I think these are somehow related to all this the scary part of
Mm.
what's happening.
Mhm. But it's the kind of thing that's going to happen anyway, and sort of the education, I think, is a crucial element, as you say, from small children through to reskilling adults and sort of keeping yourselves fresh. And I think the fact that not just technology, but the world of work is changing so much and so quickly that you need to almost reinvent yourself every few years to stay relevant and be able to have an impact and deliver value for your organization, whether you're a freelancer, whether you're working in a company or in the public sector. To be able to deliver impact and value, you need to always be updating the skills and make sure that you're relevant.
Yeah, it's like I mean, it's lifelong learning, right? You don't go to university, learn a profession, and then work, right?
Yeah,
You will need to basically reskill yourself constantly,
yeah,
and if you like that, then this is a beautiful, wonderful
yeah.
world, right? And a world of opportunities. And if you don't, I mean, that yeah, it's gonna be tough.
Yeah, there's basically winners and losers on all levels, but it's a case of being aware of what the present and the future holds, and adapting yourself to make sure that you're in line with the needs and requirements of society, as well as the labor market and the way that business and technology is moving.
Yeah, and also, I mean, what responsibility society has in sort of providing this opportunity, or
Right.
helping in between and so on, and the whole. I mean,
Yeah.
it's super interesting with the whole gig economy. It's like it's huge opportunities, but there's also a lot of things that will need to be figured out while we.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that the big part of this as well is the sort of the co-creation element, that the public and private sector need to be working together to map out the best approach for the present and the future. It's not a case of a government department can go away by themselves and create a policy or a legislative framework for the sector. It needs the inputs and the constant dialogue with industry, NGOs, and citizens to make things happen properly.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting. There is some interesting things going on in Ukraine on that topic at the moment, because I mean, we have a new digital ministry since basically
Right.
since the last election,
Yeah.
who are I mean, working a little bit like it's a little bit like startup within the government, with
Yeah.
sort of testing out different both educational initiatives, things that are done for reducing corruption,
Right.
because of course the more that's another opportunity, of course, the more you digitalize, the harder it is to
Exactly.
keep running corrupt systems.
Yes. Yeah.
so, so that's a huge thing as well.
Mm.
And yeah, it's interesting to see this small core team within the Ukrainian uh, governmental structure that is sort of acting in this way despite all the sort of bureaucracy surrounding it. It's
Yeah. So there is possibility for
Ukraine.
change.
Yeah, Ukraine became the first country in the world now who has equal legal status for a digital passport as a physical one. And
Really
it's pretty, yeah, it's a
excellent. There's a
pretty
lot of
pretty cool
progress
thing.
that's been made, and actually using technology and digitalization to not just catch up, but go beyond from a public sector and administrative perspective too.
And yeah, and that's why I think this is so exciting to be working where we are with what we do, because it's
Mm.
in a way like we are working in a country that is in a transformation
Yes.
towards away from the old and towards something new.
Yeah.
You can feel it, and you can feel you're in an industry which is part of driving this transformation, with like building the modern European level middle class and
Yeah.
and so on. and at the same time you're working in a structure that allows to sort of experimenting with new ways of organizing a company with a more decentralized, more self-managed approach.
Yeah.
So there are, there's going to be a lot of interesting things in
Definitely.
the
But you
coming
must feel like
few
you've got a
years.
hand in creating the future there, Andres. You've seen a lot of changes in your time that you've been doing this already. So it must be really, really exciting.
It is, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Andreas, thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts and your journey with us today. I think it's fascinating and a sign of what's to come. And, here's to continued success onwards and upwards.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for having me.
Thanks indeed.